All right. So, good evening, one and all. Welcome to the Sydney Saxophone Network Q&A sessions. This is the third of our Q&A sessions that we're running at the moment, and this evening we're very privileged to have joining us this evening is Dr. Michael Duke. Now, for those who don't know, Dr. Duke is Associate Professor of Classical Saxophone at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. He is also quite a prolific performer, quite around Australia and overseas, of course. He's known for playing with his duo, HD duo, with David Howie on piano. He also does a lot of freelance work with the AOBO, the Australia Opera Ballet Orchestra, Sydney Symphony Orchestra. I believe there's a quartet he works with quite a lot as well. I believe they're called the, what are they called? Nexus Quartet. And he does many other things. So this evening, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Michael Duke.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
No worries. All right, so usually with these, we're just going to start off nice and easy, just with a bit of an existential question. First of all, why the saxophone? Like, why did you gravitate towards the saxophone?
Well, so in my family, I'm the youngest of 3 children. So I grew up listening to my brother and my sister practicing music. My sister, a flautist, and my brother, well, he didn't play a lot of music, but he started off playing percussion and drums primarily. So there was a lot of practicing going on in the house, and I suppose being the youngest, I always wanted to be doing what everybody else was doing. And my mother, who was also a high school music teacher, she said to me, well, you've got a choice. You can learn flute, clarinet, or the saxophone. And saxophone sounded like the coolest instrument, so I went with that. There was no other inspiration other than that simple, straight-ahead question, what do you want to do? So I picked the saxophone. That's where it all started.
Cool. All right. And you're obviously... your background's quite extensive. You've sort of been around here, there, and everywhere. But you actually started your saxophone playing days in Melbourne, Victoria, and you completed an undergraduate degree at the VCA, and then you went on overseas and did further studies. During your undergrad days, you studied with a person called Graeme Shilton. I'm not sure if many people actually might know of this person these days. So, who was Graeme Shilton?
So Graeme was a wonderful musician who happened to be a saxophonist. I mean, he played clarinet quite a bit in his early days, but he really was a saxophonist, classical saxophonist through and through. He didn't really play jazz at all. I always often thought of him as being kind of like a violinist trapped inside a saxophone player's body. So he was in Melbourne, and he was doing pretty much most of the orchestral work there in the Melbourne Symphony and the Victorian State Orchestra. He was their number one call, I suppose. He was a member of the Peter Clinch Saxophone Quartet for a while. I think he did a tour of America with them. So, yeah, that's who Graeme was. And he was my teacher from the very first note right up until I ended my undergraduate with him. So that was a period of about 10 or 11 years. So he really was my biggest influence, I would say, as a saxophonist and as a musician.
Wow, 10 years, that's a long time. So what was this sort of the scene like during that time in Melbourne while you were studying, in terms of playing opportunities and things like that? Was it quite active, vibrant? Was there a lot of variety in work and things like that, or was it not so?
Well, yeah, not too different, I suppose, than what it is currently. Well, not currently, pre-COVID currently. I suppose the biggest difference then was that, the idea of having a saxophone soloist with orchestra was pretty much unheard of at that time, and it had happened previously, but in the 90s, there wasn't people coming every year to play with symphony orchestras. So from that perspective, it felt a little bit different, I suppose. But like I said, he was working in the orchestras, and then he brought me under his wing, and then I started working with the symphonies and doing that kind of stuff as well. We had a saxophone quartet called the Victorian Saxophone Quartet that was performing relatively regularly and doing quite a lot of gigs around town. And then I was involved in lots of other aspects too. I was in big bands. I was playing with the Musicians Union Big Band, and then some other offshoot ensembles that came up. And then I was in a ska band as well called Yeah Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which was great. So from my perspective, I was going out, I was playing in amateur musicals and amateur shows, and then I was going and occasionally doing, a little bit of orchestral work, and then I was rushing off and doing a quartet gig, and then I would go turn around the corner and I'd be playing in a ska band in a pub. So it was exactly kind of what I was, hoping to do with music, was to be involved in lots of different aspects of not just one thing, but lots of different things. So before I left to go overseas and study, it was great. It was lots of things happening and lots of opportunities.
Cool. Yeah, well, it certainly sounds like you had a very diverse experience during that time. Now, you said that you had, once you had completed your undergraduate, you ended up deciding to go overseas to, pursue further studies. So what made you decide to go overseas, and in particular you decided to go to the United States? So what was the draw card for you to go to the United States and study?
So like I said, I'd had one teacher from the very beginning, and I wanted to, I suppose, not only experience some different perspectives on music and on saxophone playing, but I just wanted to get better, for want of a better way of saying it. I felt like I'd achieved, to a certain level at the end of my undergrad, and I was really feeling like the wheels maybe starting to hit the road a little bit, and I was starting to get a little bit of momentum, and I wanted to pursue that at a higher level. So I went on a round-the-world ticket, actually, and I went over to the Netherlands, where I had a friend studying over there, and I auditioned and met Arno Bornkamp, and had a great experience with him. And then I flew around to the States and auditioned at a few different universities over there, and met a few great saxophone players, and came back home. Got lots of great feedback. At the time when I went to audition wasn't the actual audition period, if that makes sense. So I had kind of turned up and had lessons, and I suppose, it was an informal, I suppose, lesson / audition in terms of the Netherlands, and sort of the same in America. And I was told at the time in the States, look, there's no money. If you want a scholarship, you can apply, but we can't be offering you anything right now. So good luck, kind of thing. So I came back and I put in, one application at one university, and I didn't actually put in one at Indiana, and I didn't pursue the Netherlands at that point because, again, they weren't actually in their audition period. And I got a phone call about 2 weeks later, which was the admissions people from Indiana saying, "How come you didn't put in your application?" And I kind of, said, "Well, look, I enjoyed it. It was wonderful, but I was told that there's no money, so therefore I just literally can't come because I can't afford it." And then they, said, "Well, what's it gonna take?" So this kind of salesman kind of pitch on the other end, and it turned out that he did want me to come over there, and they were kind of trying to corral me into doing it. So I was very pleased, and ended up going to study in the States. I really wanted to study with Eugene Rousseau because I had heard him on the recordings, and my teacher was a big fan of Rousseau, and I suppose that had an impact on me as a young person who didn't really know that much about what was out there in the world. But I certainly enjoyed his recordings. I knew nothing of the university itself. Indiana has a huge reputation as being one of the biggest music schools in America, but I had no idea. So I went, and it was fantastic. I turned up and I took all the proficiency exams, which were in my case deficiency exams. So you have to take an exam in music history, early music history, later music history, music theory, written theory, oral, piano, sight, and then if you don't pass each of their little tests, you have to take a semester's course, which is basically an undergrad smashed into a semester.
Wow.
So it kind of helped a lot of steps that were in my education at that point in a very quick manner. So
Wow, sounds a fairly intense experience getting over there and getting set up. Now,
Yeah, it was very intense. Yeah.
you said so. Obviously, you got the opportunity to study with one of the greats, Eugene Rousseau, but also whilst you were studying there, you also had the opportunity. Some of your fellow students, a little bit older, I believe, was such the likes of Otis Murphy and Kenneth Che. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, so when I turned up there, also doing master's degrees were Kenneth Che and Otis Murphy and Steve Stusek, and there's a bunch of people who are all phenomenal players. Yeah, they're all about 1 or 2 years older than me.
Wow.
So they were my colleagues right up until Rousseau left, and then Otis took over. So it was yeah, fantastic.
Must have been a fantastic experience, just sort of being in a group of that caliber, just sort of, learning and developing, not just with, learning with Eugene, but also having the opportunity to work with those people and stuff like that.
I think it's the case with anybody that goes to study overseas. There's a lot of fantastic education that's available in Australia, and I think that that you don't have to go overseas straight away, and that, like, having done my undergrad in Australia was, for me, the best thing that I could have done to kind of set myself up to really kind of take the most benefit out of what I did overseas. Mm-hmm. But when I got there, I had amazing lessons with my teacher, but I learned equally as much, if not maybe more, from just the colleagues and the people that I was around. And I think that's probably a common experience for anybody that goes to study in a school of good repute, because there's a lot of high-flying people who are all trying to do the same thing. So you take your inspiration off each other, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Now, little known fact, well, hopefully it's known by people, but not only are you a excellent classical saxophonist of the highest caliber, but you also have a interest in jazz, and to the point where you actually went and studied and did a jazz degree at the Berklee College of Music. So, just out of curiosity, having gone and done bachelor's, masters, and a doctorate level in the classical saxophone, and then going to do a jazz degree, what was the thinking behind that? What made you decide to take on another degree, let alone a degree that was in a completely different genre?
Yeah, well, just to qualify that, I didn't actually do a jazz degree. I did a jazz diploma, which is...
apologies.
That's okay. I just don't want to put out the wrong messages. Yeah. That's a 2-year course. It's basically half a degree, half a 4-year degree.
Right.
So you still have to take the theory classes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's only 2 years instead of 4.
Okay.
So, look, the reasons behind that were, so I had a full-time job. I was teaching in a small liberal arts college in Indianola, Iowa, which is called Simpson College. Mm-hmm. And I was taking the big band, and I was teaching a jazz history class, and I occasionally ran an introduction to improvisation course. And I've always loved jazz. I've always definitely listened to jazz, and have a huge record collection. But like I said earlier, been involved in ensembles like big bands and things like that. So, but I never really pursued it in a serious way in terms of studying jazz. I'd always just kind of pick things up as I went along. So when I came to Indiana, I got to take some classes with a great educator, David Baker, who passed away a few years ago. One of the first people to really codify jazz improvising in books and education. So, and that was great. That was kind of an entryway into studying jazz, but it really only whet the appetite. So I suppose the logic was, if I wanted to kind of keep moving up and into bigger and better jobs in teaching of saxophone, because my job at Indianola was fantastic, but it was a very small school and it had a very small music department. And I suppose looking ahead in terms of career, it was always going to be making myself more marketable and more employable if I was able to appeal to the jazz as well as classical side of things. So there was the interest for myself in just bettering myself. There was this idea of career and advancing my career. And then also at the exact same time, my lovely wife had just got into a Harvard residency in Boston, in one of the three Harvard hospitals there, and she kind of had this incredible opportunity to study at one of like the world's top medical institutions. And so I kind of said, well, maybe this is the chance to go and study jazz. I'll go to Berklee, which has also got a great reputation, and study some jazz. And so I quit my full-time teaching saxophone job, which sounds insane, and went to Berklee. So it was great. I had 2 years studying there and loved it.
Yeah, wow, it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously those 2 years, you got a lot out of those. Were there any particular highlights that you can recall that really stick out in your mind from your time there?
Yeah, I suppose that there were lots of highlights. Some of the main ones were playing in the... So I auditioned as a baritone saxophone player, believe it or not. The reason for that was, I said the same thing to them. I want to come, but, is there any scholarship money? We didn't obviously have a lot of money, and my wife had a bit of a wage from what she was doing, but wasn't a full-on doctor's wage at that point. She was still in training too. And they said, oh, not really, you're kind of old. We're really giving our money out to the young students. So I was probably in my early 20s at that time. Mm-hmm. And then they called me back the next day and said, do you play baritone saxophone? I was like, yeah, of course, always, like playing it now. Because I could play baritone saxophone, and so I auditioned on that. They liked the fact that I could read. They liked the fact that I could play in tune. So they put me in the top big band, which was amazing. Berklee College is massive. They have something like 4,000 music majors at Berklee.
Wow.
So they have like lots and heaps and heaps and heaps of ensembles. So to be placed in the top ensemble was like fantastic. Led by Greg Hopkins, who played in the Buddy Rich Big Band for 8 years as his lead trumpeter. And so there I was, sitting on the baritone chair. I didn't have to do a lot of improvising because it's not the stereotypical role of the baritone saxophone in the big band setting anyway. And, people sitting next to me, it was kind of like the Indiana experience. They were just students, but the lead alto player now plays in the Mingus Big Band.
Wow.
And I won't go through it, but a whole bunch of these other people have gone on to incredible... Oh, if I'm going to name drop, the drummer is now the drummer in Imagine Dragons, the pop band.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, Dan, can't remember his last name. But yeah, so he was the drummer in the band. So that was just a great experience of really kind of young, talented students. Many of them also had an undergraduate degree and kind of come to Berklee to kind of do, I suppose... wasn't actually a graduate degree, but it was kind of that next layer before they went on to New York. And then the other big experience, I suppose, was I got placed in the Joe Lovano ensemble with Joe Lovano running the Joe Lovano ensemble.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was, on one hand, like amazing, and on the other hand, absolutely terrifying because... this was I think a nonette, so it was just like a baritone, maybe 2 tenors, an alto, a trumpet, and a trombone as the horns, and we were playing his arrangements, his 52nd Street arrangements of these. He got a couple of albums of these kind of bebop stuff, and he was playing as well every week. Just sitting there in the room with him was an incredible experience.
Wow, sounds fantastic. Now, as you said before, one of the reasons that you did it was you wanted to sort of gain a more holistic understanding of the saxophone, not just from the classical perspective, but the jazz perspective as well. But having to do this degree, I'd imagine that you would have sort of had to go all in terms of playing style and setups and, completely changing the way you play in a sense. How did you find that transition going from, years and years of classical playing, going into that jazz setting, and then coming back out of that later on?
Yeah, well, so I went into it with the mind that I would be doing both, that I was going to be a classical player that was studying jazz, but I very quickly realized that it was all or nothing, for me anyway. I couldn't really split my brain between the two. So for that period, even though I did play in a quartet and did do some gigs in classical saxophone, I really kind of put that to the side and dived in pretty much 100% jazz. In terms of setup, I completely changed my setup. You know, I already had a jazz setup of like a Maya mouthpiece and a Jody jazz tenor and all that kind of stuff, and different reeds and all that kind of stuff. And tonally, I kind of had that all worked out to my own. You know, I wasn't worried about that perspective and like trying to sound like a jazz player. It was more about developing and improvising language and learning the, you know, the different syllables of jazz to put them together to be a better improviser. And that's, you know, that was a really humbling experience. I thought, well, here I am. I've got my doctorate. I know how to be a student, right? Because I've been doing this for a long time. But then to go into a different field, it's literally like learning another language. It was like starting again in some respect, and all the frustrations of knowing what you have to be able to do, but not being able to do it, and practicing and it not coming out when you want it to come out, and it really kind of showed me again, you know, what it is to really be a student and the frustrations. You kind of forget these things after a while. So I learnt that with a vengeance.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly no easy feat, that's for sure. But it really, is quite a hefty, you know, challenge.
Anyone that can play jazz and classical at a high level, I don't mean like at a mediocre, but at a really high level, is that my hat's off to them. It's just the amount of work that goes into both is incredible. And how they've managed to split their time to be able to do it at such a high level is incredible. There's only really a handful of people, I won't name them, but I could name that I think, you know, really do it at a high level.
Yeah, as you say, like you could probably list them on one hand. You know how many people are out there that do it to that extent. So.
At the highest level, yeah, it's really tough. And I never really got to that point. Absolutely in jazz, you know, I got to maybe a semi-proficient level, you know, to the point where if I'm given a chord changes, if I have, you know, to improvise, if I have some time to sit down and look at it and think it through, I could probably make something out of it. Yeah. But not at the highest level where these people, you know, they know hundreds of tunes in their head and they can improvise, you know, creatively off the. I'm certainly not at that level, but it was an incredible experience for sure.
For sure. Now, moving on to sort of your more recent projects, since you know coming back to Australia after your time in the US, obviously you do some teaching at Conservatorium. But before we go into that, we'll talk a bit about some of your performance work here back in Australia. Now, as we said at the start, you do a lot of chamber music and you play with a lot of the major orchestras around, but also you have quite a really sort of active group called the HD Duo with pianist David Howie. Now, with this group, obviously very highly successful, but it seems that one of the most prominent things about this ensemble is that you guys are very active in pursuing the creation and commissioning of new music for saxophone. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's basically all we do is new commissions. We have done concerts where we've played from the standard repertoire, but those are far and few between. It's more about project-based stuff. So, you know, when you say we're very active, I think we're very active in spurts. So,
right.
There's a period when we have a project and we get to the point where we have the music, and then we start touring it, and then we'll go off and play some concerts, and then come back and record it. And then we're going to go into hibernation for a little while, and then we come back out again with our next project. So it's been amazing. I mean, I met David at my interview for the Sydney Conservatorium. He was my accompanist for my interview, and very quickly after I got the job, I said, you know, this is great. Do you want to keep doing this? And he said, yeah. So it's been fantastic to have somebody that is really a collaborative artist. You know, somebody who's just as interested in the music as you are. It's not just you saying, will you play this music with me? It's more them, you know, giving just as much as you're giving. So it's been a great 11 years now, or more.
Wow.
12 years. And you know, we've managed to play concerts around the world, you know, with different grants and different projects that we've had. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah. No, as I said, like you guys sort of toured, you know, all over the place, Mexico, and you played a lot of the conferences, both NASA and also the World Congresses as well. Sort of what you were talking about before, that sort of collaboration and being on, in terms of playing in the ensemble, sort of leads me to my next question about the actual creation process for the new music. Now, obviously, as I said, like there's a lot of new repertoire that you guys deal with. What, just for people out there who might be looking to, you know, commission new music or, you know, approach composers and stuff like that, can you talk us through a bit about how the process works? Like, how do you sort of get from the conception of the idea of getting a new work to, you know, the finished product of the actual printed score in your hand and then start rehearsing it, or even further beyond there to like a recorded end product?
Yeah, okay, so look, there's probably no one way of this happening, but I'll tell you maybe some of the ways that it's happened for us. Mm-hmm. Usually what it happens is we have to, we decide on a concept for a project. So, so for example, our first project was called Australian Portrait. So they were new commissions of Australian music. So that kind of obviously narrows down who we're going to talk to when it comes to composers. There are a lot of composers on the faculty at the Conservatorium, and a lot of great composers. So that was obviously a logical place for us to start, with people that we already knew, versus approaching, you know, people that we'd never met before. I think if you have that relationship with somebody, that's probably the best place to start, because they know you, they kind of know your personality. I think it's easier for someone to write for you if they know you. Sounds obvious, but you know, looking at your own network, I think, is a great place to start. But you know, when I say that though, a lot of we have commissioned quite a lot of people that we'd never met before too. So so say for example, the Mexican, we did a project called the Mexican Connection, and the concept behind that was half of the CD would be Australian compositions and the other half would be Mexican compositions. And we would put them side by side on the CD, and people could kind of decide, you know, is there a connection between Australian music and Mexican music? Is it all just music? Is there a sound that comes from Mexico and a sound that comes from Australia? Kind of the idea of what is the Australian sound in terms of performing and composition as well. So, so for that, we went to Eduardo Diamunis, who's the chief conductor at the Sydney Conservatorium at the time, and you know, a Mexican citizen as well, and he gave us a big list of composers and said, check these people out. So then we went and did our research and listened to a whole bunch of music, and from that we drilled down to a list of people we wanted to approach. We had a grant, a very modest grant from the university, that allowed us to offer them more an honorarium than really a commission fee. Mm-hmm. And then we just told them, this is what we're going to do. We'd like to record, we'd like you to write a 10-minute piece, and it doesn't have to be about anything. It doesn't have to be on any topic. It's up to you for whatever you'd like to write on. And then we're going to come over to Mexico, we're going to perform it, then we're going to come back to Australia and perform it, and then we'll record it, and it'll go on a CD. And I think the being in that position at the university where we have access to recording facilities and to an engineer, that being able to offer that recording side of things is a big carrot too for composers. I think some of their fears are that they're going to put all this effort into a piece, they're going to get their honorarium in this case, which is not, I mean, some money, but not a lot, and then the piece will be played once or twice, and that'll be it. It'll disappear. So having it on a recording at least kind of has it out there. That's something that they can use as a promotional tool, as you know, and obviously if people listen to it, they may want to perform it. And then I'll cut this short. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
That's all right. It's your interview.
So it's an interview. So then we once they've agreed, and actually surprisingly, pretty much everyone we've ever asked has agreed. Which you know, you would think that maybe there'd be a few people who'd be like, no. But I think composers, you know, are excited that somebody has found them, and that, and again, if they're going to be recording it and performing it, it might be enticing. And then every composer is different. Some people are really open to the collaborative process, and they want to really talk it through with you, and they really want to, maybe they've never written for the saxophone before, so there's sessions about that. Sometimes they send through sketches, and they say, could you try this? And we record those sketches and send them back. And other times we get composers who they just say, yep, no worries, it'll be on your desk on this date, and then the piece turns up, and then that's it.
Right.
But for the most part, it's more enjoyable, obviously, for us as performers to have a hand in this. And we do rehearsal recordings, and we send them back to them, and then we had suggestions about, maybe you could change this, or could you make this more involved, or, so there is a collaboration in the majority of what we've done.
Yeah.
And then as to publishing, we don't publish scores. We've pointed them to places that do publish scores. And some of the composers we've worked with have their own publishers that they use. And sometimes the pieces just end up in the composer's website. That's kind of, I suppose, people, they listen to the CD. If they want to get the music, they either contact me or the composer.
Yeah, and particularly in this day and age where it's so easy just to go online and just find the links to it straight away. Now, for those playing at home, just if you're curious, the HD Duo is what we were talking about there. There's actually several CDs out. I believe they're self like your own label, I believe, independent label.
No. We have CDs on the Carla UK label, which has now been taken over by Signum. And on the Saxophone Classics, or I think it used to be called Clarinet Classics, record label from the UK as well.
Right.
And actually, we've got 2 more CDs. That's what we've been doing over this COVID period. 2 brand new CDs. One which is all Thai music and Australian music, so half Thai, half Australian. And the other CD is Music of the Commonwealth. So there's 6 compositions. That was about 2 years ago now that we went and toured around the world to 6 different countries and played all this music. So we're really excited to finally be getting this to the point where we can put it out. So that should be in the next couple of months.
Sweet. Cool. Now, just sort of as a general question, I mean, obviously you've played extensively in a whole bunch of different things. Is there any sort of standout memory that you have of a particular performance highlight in your thoughts, that sort of like something that was sort of like a career-defining moment, or something that's quite a memorable experience?
I suppose your life is full of flashbacks, isn't it? Let me think. Well, I suppose the first one was when I was at the end of high school. I entered the Pioneer Electronics Young Concerto Competition, whatever it was called, and with the Melbourne Symphony, and I was chosen to be one of, I think, 3 finalists, or 3 people that get to perform with the orchestra. So at the age of 17, I got to play the Glazunov Concerto with the Melbourne Symphony, and just that feeling of standing in front of an orchestra of like professional musicians, or they weren't, I don't even need the air quotes because they were, and as a 17-year-old kind of on the cusp of wanting to do this for a career, that was like a real shot in the arm and a real exciting moment. And then fast forward, I suppose, to about 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to perform a world premiere of Lyle Chan's My Dear Benjamin, which was I don't know if you call it a concerto, but a 40-minute work for baritone tenor voice, and alto saxophone and orchestra with the Queensland Symphony. And that was a really gratifying experience because I know Lyle really well and I love his music, and to do that with the orchestra was amazing. But then a year later, for it to win the APRA Orchestral Composition of the Year was really exciting. To see that it wasn't just me that enjoyed the music. Wow,
that's fantastic. Now, just sort of going on, just being mindful of time, just moving on to your teaching at the moment. Now, you're currently the head of classical saxophone at the Sydney Conservatorium, associate professor. Now, this is a very unique position because I believe it was the first full-time classical saxophone lecturer position created in Australia. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's been classical saxophone taught in Australia for a long time. Yeah. Obviously in pretty much every state. But up to this point, up to 2008, these positions all involved doing other things. So Peter Clinch was in Melbourne teaching saxophone and clarinet and teaching education courses. And there were people in Sydney, you know, teaching clarinet and saxophone. And so there was never a position that was solely just teaching classical saxophone, which is, I suppose, has been used as a high watermark in American education, you know, with Cecil Leeson and Larry Teal and people like that, who were the first to do that. So it was quite exciting when this position came open, and they offered it to me.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Now, could you tell us a little bit about the course itself? Well, I mean, there's several courses. There's obviously the bachelor's and a couple of different variants to that bachelor's degree, but also there's postgraduate degrees. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of what happens in terms of saxophone at the conservatorium and what's sort of offered?
Sure. So I think it's important for, whoever's listening to this, if they don't know the Sydney Conservatorium, to know that it's a comprehensive music degree program. So in other words, you're doing music theory, you're doing music history, you're doing, you know, all those oral theory classes and sight singing and all that kind of stuff, as well as saxophone. So you're getting a real well-rounded degree. Where I did my undergrad was fantastic, but it was very much on performance. And we had some classes around those other aspects, but it was very weak. And that's when I said before, I went to Indiana and got my butt handed to me in the first week that I was there, in terms of all that stuff. So in terms of saxophone, so there's obviously weekly lessons, and then there's chamber music that all students are required to be involved in. And then we have ensembles. We have large ensembles, saxophone orchestra, wind band, with a phenomenal wind band director, John Lynch. And there's the modern music ensemble, which uses saxophone, not every semester, but most, I would say. We have saxophones in there, so there's opportunities to perform. Symphony orchestra, of course, using the saxophone as needed. And so there's a lot of performing opportunities. Students obviously have their performance classes, but they also have the opportunity to put on recitals and to hire out the halls at no charge to put on their own recitals as they want to, and of course degree recitals as well, as part of what they're doing. So, you know, I think it's important that a performance degree has a lot of performance opportunities, and
of course.
From what I see, there's as many as the students want to take. You know, anybody that says there's not enough performing opportunities, I scratch my head a bit, because it's really up to them if they want to go and sign up for a recital. They can put on as many recitals as, I suppose, the hall is available. So, and then, you know, from the way I'm teaching a classical degree. I'm not so much teaching jazz. We have a phenomenal jazz program and phenomenal jazz teachers. I do help my students if they're interested in improvising and that side of things, but it is a classical degree.
Yep.
And so, you know, we're doing all kinds of weird and wonderful things and playing. I try to get my students to at least be aware of and study the standard saxophone repertoire, so they have an understanding of it. But if they have a focus in a different direction and they're really interested in playing, you know, whatever other music, whatever you want to call it, contemporary or avant-garde, or that's fine too. I like to let the students, or encourage my students to search out their repertoire rather than being spoon-fed. I'm a big fan of not spoon-feeding students and trying to encourage them to be curious.
Right.
Because I think that's a incredibly important aspect to any musician's life. Once they leave, you know, the conservatory, they have to have that ability and desire to search and to look for things.
No, for sure. I mean, just, I'm not being biased or anything, but I obviously studied with you for a time a few years back, and there's still a lot of things that you've taught me that I still use to this day in my own practice and in what I do. So there's certainly things there. And that sort of leads on to my next question, where you're talking about your teaching philosophy and how, by the sounds of it, you sort of encourage students to be quite self-motivated and self-directed in the way they approach it. Is there anything else in terms of your sort of teaching approach that is also that you've sort of developed over time from your experiences playing and teaching at different universities, say, in the US when you were teaching at the colleges there, and or even from your own student experiences?
Yeah, well, look, I think, the teaching does come from your own experiences, from the different teachers that I've had, and so when I was in Indiana, and at a certain point after 3 years, Rousseau moved on, he retired, and they brought in a whole bunch of different people from around America who were auditioning for the job. There was about 8 of them. So I got exposed to a whole bunch of amazing pedagogues and performers, and to be able to see all their different methodologies and how they worked with the students and how they got their results was excellent. And of course, going to conferences and watching the masters teach, you pick up little things here and there as well. So I would be very much influenced by or standing on the shoulders of the teachers that I've had myself. I'm trying to think. So in terms of the students, look, I think self-motivation is probably the hardest thing to teach, and the hardest thing to learn, but the most important thing that people can take out of what they learn in an undergrad or even at a master's and doctoral level, being able to self-motivate, not looking out all the time please, why aren't you inspiring me, but looking within to find that spark and that flame and that excitement to be able to self-motivate, because once you cut the umbilical cord of the university, you're on your own, right? I mean, there are certainly, conferences and places that you can go to be inspired. I'm not saying that doesn't exist and isn't important. Of course, that's incredibly important. But it's this idea of being able to be self-sufficient and not be looking out all the time for the answers, but trying to kind of work on them yourself. So it's not an easy topic to deal with, and some people really buck against it as students, but I think it's something that's too important to ignore. Yeah.
All right. Now, just throwing it out to the gallery, so all the audience out there this evening, if you do have a question for Dr. Duke, you're more than welcome to type it in the chat section of the Zoom. So if we have anyone in there, you're more than welcome to type in a question. But while we're waiting, I've just got another question for you. Now, obviously, COVID-19 is the hot topic at the moment for very unpleasant reasons. And like most of us, it has affected everyone in the music industry. How have you been... Well, obviously, it's sort of changed things that you do in terms of performance and teaching. How have you sort of dealt with and adapted to all this chaos at the moment?
Right. Well, from a saxophone perspective, and in terms of my own practice, my own playing, it's been great. And what I mean by that, it's almost been like a sabbatical in that I haven't had... I often find myself preparing for the next performance. That's kind of like what my practice involves. There are things that I'll be trying to work on improving my own playing along the way, but they often have to take a back seat to whatever's the most burning topic. If I've got a concert the next week, that's what I'm usually focused on. So with that removed from the equation, it's meant that I've been able to really kind of hunker down and have some me time when it comes to the saxophone. So that has been incredible, and I'm really enjoying it. From the teaching perspective, I think everybody was kind of very apprehensive about moving onto Zoom or Skype. But the semester that we just had, I mean, maybe the students, if they're online, can chime in. But I know that my students all really grew across the semester, like you would hope they would, but like maybe more than I thought would be possible through Skype. And I don't know, maybe it's the medium itself, in that everybody seemed to be really prepared for lessons. Maybe people weren't having to commute 2-3 hours a day to get anywhere, so they were able to use that time to zone in on what they were doing. And I think it kind of affected my teaching in that I talk a lot, so I really had to shut up and listen to them play, well, pretty much everything, and then talk. So it kind of that was good for me, I think, as a teacher. I do tend to, I think, interrupt a lot, and the poor student may not get past the first line of the page of what they're working on because I'm, talking about concepts. So so that has been really good. I mean, I don't want to live in an online world. I'm excited to go back to face because it's obviously better. But it hasn't been a big negative for me. I think it's been an interesting experiment more than anything.
For sure. All right, now we're going to the speed round, home stretch. Just out of curiosity, if you only had 10 minutes in a day to practice, what would you practice and why?
Well, like I said before, usually there's a concert or there's something that's been prepared for. So it's like what we call musical triage. You're working on the most desperate bits that need to be worked on before that concert. So if I only had 10 minutes, I would probably be playing the hard technical passages slowly and methodically from those pieces that I'm working on. If it's today and now, then it's going to be going back to these projects that I'm working on. So I've taken on the project of really trying to nail double tonguing and triple tonguing over this COVID break. So I relish every moment I get down and put the kids in front of the TV and sit down and practice for an hour or so, or 10 minutes if I only had 10 minutes, and go through some of these articulation exercises that I've been drilling. So that's kind of where my head's at right now.
Right. No, it's very cool. I might have to get the name of some of those because I wouldn't mind learning some of that myself.
Absolutely. I've been using brass books because they're the masters of technique when it comes to double and triple tonguing.
Like the L bands.
Yeah, there's the Arbin book, and then so there was a saxophone player. I'll put it in the chat later. I can't remember his name right now. He wrote a book in the 1940s. Which is about double tonguings, and which is kind of interesting. And then there's also a book called The Goldman Tonguing Etudes. It's around here somewhere on the floor, I think. I can't put my hand on it. Here we go. And it fits just fine on the saxophone, but you just have to basically extend the range, because trumpets don't like to play above the stave.
Yeah, of course.
Too much. So you can just take some of those exercises and shoot them up a little bit. But yeah, this is the other one, Kenneth Dowse. So these are both online. You can just download them as PDFs because they're both out of print.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Yeah, that was one of the questions from the gallery about the book details. So I believe you might be able to find them on Scribed or something like that.
Like literally just Google Kenneth Dowse double tonguing.
Even easier.
Or Goldman and PDF, and they'll be there.
Cool. Now we have another question from the gallery. A person asks, for students who want to specialize on a particular saxophone, what are some things that they should do / focus on? All
right. So my philosophy during the degree is that really by the end of the 4 years, you should have at least experienced all 4 of the major saxophones, SATB, baritone, right? But then, of course, there's some people that come in already specializing on instruments. So what was the specific question? What should they...
students who want to specialize on a particular saxophone, what are the things they should focus on, or what are the things they should be doing to assist them in that?
All right, so learning how to play that saxophone for what it is. And what I mean by that is, you hear a lot of alto player or tenor players trying to play soprano and playing it like a tenor, or playing an alto, and picking up a baritone and making a nice sound, but playing it like an alto with the embouchure, too firm, and causing, crazy intonation problems. So working out how to adjust the embouchure and the oral cavity so that it fits the instrument that you're playing. And one of the best places to start is the mouthpiece pitches that you'll find as codified in the Rousseau book. Mm-hmm. He didn't come up with this. It came from a man named Santi Runyon.
Yep.
Who was a teacher in Chicago from the 1930s onwards. Gave lessons to Charlie Parker and all kinds of people. But he came up with this idea of mouthpiece pitches. So a C on the soprano, an A on the alto, a G on the tenor, and a D on the baritone. And they're just a starting point. You're not playing that pitch all the time when you're playing the instrument. I'm sure it changes up and down depending on register, but it's kind of a default. And if you can get those pitches happening, then that kind of will help affect the embouchure to make, so when you're playing the instruments, they'll be a lot more centered. So it's a good place to start.
For sure. And that's mouthpiece information is actually available in Eugene Rousseau's book.
His book High Tones. Yeah.
Yep. Right.
Yep. Saxophone High Tones. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I know you've mentioned you got a lot of upcoming exciting things happening, like you've got your HD duo releases. Oh, hang on, one more question.
Do you have perfect pitch? Do you think it would be overly useful or not? I do not have perfect pitch, which would have been very useful when I was at Berklee in those harmony classes. They would sit on the piano and they would just play like some crazy chord with like 15 notes in it, and there were people that could just say exactly what each note was. Would it be useful? Maybe. I have relative pitch, and I think that after having worked on that for a long time, that's just as useful maybe as having perfect pitch. Because I don't have it, I don't miss it. If that makes sense.
No, understandable.
So I don't actually know whether what the benefits of having perfect pitch would be over but I don't yearn for it, put it that way.
Well, I know from experience, a colleague of mine at work has perfect pitch, and when he was at school with me, he actually learnt saxophone and clarinet, and he absolutely hated it because he has perfect pitch. He couldn't deal with the transposition, so it really messed with his head.
Yeah, and I remember studying too that there were a lot of people that had perfect pitch in some of the theory classes I was in, so they would purposely change the pitch up to about a quarter tone of the music examples they were playing to throw them off. So, but anyway, I never noticed.
Cool. All right. Well, as I said, you've got a lot of exciting projects coming up, and there's more than that, I believe. But I'm sure we'll be hearing about some of that stuff in the coming weeks and months. But if we were to keep an eye out for anything, what would be the best way to sort of do that?
Yes. Well, as we discovered, my website has died, so I'll be trying to fix that up over the next couple of days. I suppose the majority of gigs coming up are Nexus focused. So the first one is the August 9th digital concert that we're playing for the Melbourne Digital Concert Hall. So that, Facebook is probably the best way. You can either friend me on Facebook or follow us through HD Duo or through Nexus Quartet, because that's usually where everything ends up on Facebook at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, most of the gigs, of course, we're not doing live gigs right now, have all been postponed to next year. So all the exciting things that were happening this year, like concertos with orchestras and playing at festivals and all that kind of stuff, it's all happening. It's just not till next year. But we live in hope, I suppose. But the digital concert's coming, so that'll be exciting. And then later in this year, we still have a few concerts that haven't been cancelled. Yep. So hopefully things are under control by then, and if you follow us on Facebook, you'll find it.
Yep, and I believe Nexus also has a mailing list as well, and an Instagram page. So for all those young hip kids out there who do Instagram, we're on there. And for those who like the email, we have that too. Yeah,
absolutely. Great.
Excellent. All right, well, if there's no other questions, big thank you for joining us this evening, Dr. Duke. It was an absolute pleasure and thrilled to have you here, and I'm very thankful for everyone to coming along this evening and joining us. And yes, we're very I've certainly learnt a lot this evening myself, and it's really good to sort of touch base and get some things like that. So again, thank you very much, and to everyone out there, have a good evening, safe night, stay warm, and we will see you soon.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Thanks for organising this and keeping a bit of sense of community going. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you, and
Cheers,
good night,
guys.
everyone.
See ya.